Hi, this is part three of series of what is JSON, and this one particularly is called 7 Rules of JSON. So we're gonna go through some definitions, some best practices, and also we'll see some common errors and how to avoid them. On the top of the slide, you can see this railroad diagram of what JSON, how syntax is, how it flows. And this is only one of the diagrams you can see. You can find the definitions and more about diagrams, this kind of diagrams, at the website json.org. And railroad diagrams are used to be commonly used, but you still see them quite often sometimes on different sites. So what is JSON? We already covered that. It's a JavaScript object notation, so it's an acronym. It's a lightweight data format used to exchange the data between different computers, but also between computers and applications. The nice thing about JSON, it is human readable, but it's also very to read and process by computers. It's language independent, means that pretty much all of the modern programming languages can read and write and process JSON files. Okay, so the first thing that we have to remember when we compare it to CSV, that the properties in JSON can be listed in any order. You just separate them by commas, but they can be in any order in CSV file, for example. So which makes it convenient to edit. You can always insert object in insert property in any part of the JSON file. So here's the thing that some people may not know, but JSON does not allow comments. It does not support comments. If you put something like this in JSON, it would be an error because there's no support for comments. And the second one is keys must be unique. So within the JSON object, you see the property name and there's another property name. So JSON wouldn't know which of those properties to choose, the first one or the second one. So it's actually not allowed if it's not a valid JSON structure. So the keys must be unique. You can use the same key in different objects or sub-objects, but you should not be using the same key within the same object. There's a different styles for naming the keys in JSON. And sometimes you want to use more than one word, for example, home address. In this case, it's called lowercase style. We just combine two words together, all lowercase. It's called a lowercase style. The next style is called camelCase. You start with the lowercase, but if you want to append another word, then you start it with the uppercase for the first character in that word. So in this case, it's home address, and it's called camelCase because it can have a hump in the middle of this long word. The kebab case is when you're using the dashes or hyphens to separate words. I guess it makes it easier for the humans to read. The same with the camel case. It makes it easier for the humans to read, but you see this little, like a skewer that extracts through the different words. So that's why it's called kebab case. And the last one is called snake case. In this case, you use underscore to combine two or more words together. So which one you prefer, it's a matter of personal preference, but every company usually has its own standards or recommended practices, how they format JSON inside of the company, because you don't really know sometimes who will be using your data. So you have to create a definition of your JSON file, how you send it the data, document it. But here's like a little statistics based on the research that I was able to find. It might not be completely accurate, but research shows that 60% of the cases of the APIs or JSONs use camel case, and about 25% snake case, and kebab and lowercase are very rarely used. But again, it depends on the company, it depends on the preferences, the internal standards that you have. So I did a little bit of research. What are the conventions that are used by big companies? Google, Facebook, Amazon, and GitHub is public repository mostly. And I was a little bit surprised that the camel case is used by Google and Facebook as a main style, but the Amazon and GitHub is the opposite. Snake case is dominating. And you can also see lowercase sometimes. It's present in all of them a little bit. And kebab case is basically not existent. People don't really use that much. So I think there's also a difference for internal use of JSON, for internal APIs versus external. I think internal quite often is using camelCase. I see that especially with among the Java programmers, they quite often use camelCase. But for the public APIs, I actually see most of the time the camelCase. I think for it's some kind of a. I didn't really see companies using camelCase for external APIs. Here's an example. This is the Meta documentation online, and you can see they're using underscore, which is a snake case. And I also saw the same thing for Google public documentation for other websites. So other major data providers, I think most of the time they're using the snake case. Here's a very important point. JSON keys are case sensitive. So if you put name, lowercase, if you can uppercase N and do uppercase the whole word, these are three different independent properties of this object. Right? That's not the same as you would, for example, if you work with the SQL data in the table names and column names in SQL are in case insensitive, you can use them uppercase, lowercase, SQL will understand them. But JSON is case sensitive, so these are three different variables, three different properties. And you can test it in the browser console if you like to. But it's very important to remember, because if you come in from programming languages and you use uppercase interchangeably, whatever, but you may not be paying attention, you think that for the data it does matter. Most of the programming languages are case sensitive these days. So you just have to remember that JSON is like case sensitive, same to programming languages. On another note, XML is also case sensitive. It was defined as case sensitive from the beginning. So XML and JSON are both case sensitive. So please remember that. So when you're naming your keys, when you're documenting them, you have to be precise about the uppercase, lowercase, whatever you use. All right. So let's look at the common mistakes or common errors that happen in the JSON. So the first common error is when you have an extra comma. In this case, for example, you will see age 30, and there's a comma at the end. And what it means for JSON, there should be another property after age. There should be another name value pair, but it's not there. It's just you run into the end of the object. So that is invalid JSON, and it causes a lot of problems sometimes. The next one is use the proper data type. In this case, 25, if you put it in double quotes, it's going to be a string, not a number. And if you, in your application, if you want to use some kind of meta operation on it, it will be a string, so it would not be processed as the number. So you probably have to be aware of this. And if you want to put it as a string, sure, no problem. But if you want to use it as a number, just don't use the double quotes. And another common problem is people forget to put double quotes about the key itself. So in this case, name should be in double quotes. I know it's not a valid JSON. So these are statistics of how often these errors are happening. So missing or like an extra commas, but 1/3 of the errors that people have with JSON. Quotes in the keys, that's number 2. Data type mismatch is number 3, and you also have unescaped characters and duplicated keys. So here's another best practice for JSON. It is recommended to use full names or full words for naming the keys, like full underscore name, last underscore name. This is the preferred way, even though some people, sometimes they just shorten them, like F name and L name, first name, last name, you can do this, but this is not recommended because it makes it harder for humans to understand it and remember this. It's just easier to put the full words, and it becomes explicitly clear what this property is. Some people express concern that the longer key names create a bigger JSON files, a bigger payload, which is true, but it's only true when the data is at rest and stored, right? For transferring the data, usually the data is compressed, and also can be compressed for storing as well. But if you take, let's say, 10 kilobyte data, JSON data, and with the full names, let's suppose it's going to be 50 kilobytes because it uses more characters. But when you compress it, when you zip it to send it to another server or an application, usually data is compressed, and then basically the data size difference between compressed is very minor, so we usually don't worry about that. Another best practice is keep similar properties, related properties close to each other. For example, in this case, first name and last name, just put them next to each other because you may have a dozen other properties, email, home address, and everything else, but keep them together for consistency. It makes it easier for humans to read and see that you have a first name and last name in that object. The next item is, sorry, I jumped to a place. So the next best practice is to keep your JSON structure as much flat as possible. So don't add too much hierarchies. For example, in this case, we have a first name and last name in the object, and that's about it. What we can do instead, possibly, is to create inside the object, create another object called person. You see curly braces, so it's an object. Inside of the person, you can create an object called name, which is another object, and then you can have two properties, the first and last name of that object. So now you can have three objects over here instead of one, and that's why it's not recommended. Try to keep flat structure, easy to read, easy to process, a little bit faster to parse, but also it's easier to maintain over time. Well, the next one is let's compare JSON to other data formats. We talked about CSV in the previous videos, but let's also compare it to the XML. So XML been used for quite a long time. It came out before JSON. So between CSV, JSON, and XML, they're all human readable. It's kind of easy for the humans to read any of those formats. For the hierarchical data, it's only JSON and XML that supports hierarchical data. CSV does not. You cannot create sub objects in CSV because basically it's a table structure. Comments, already covered that. JSON does not support comments. XML does support comments. In CSV, you can add comments as a separate column or find another way to do it, but there's no specific best practice how to put comments in CSV. But important thing to remember is that JSON does not support comments. Schema definition, I'm not going to cover it in this video. I'm going to cover it in a separate video. It's a very interesting topic on its own. You can define allowed structure or schema for the JSON. So when you receive the data, you actually can validate that your data is as you mentioned the schema that you defined. So JSON supports JSON schema, XML supports XML schema definition, and CSV does not support any schema. File size. The smallest file size would be for the CSV format. XML is the largest file size, and JSON is the golden middle. It's kind of medium size. And for the parsing speeds, the CSV mostly used for import and export data. It's very fast. JSON is fast too, and XML is the slowest out of the. So the reason people use JSON because it has a good combination of properties and features, and it's fast enough and it's flexible enough to work pretty much with any data. So in summary, these are the 7 rules or practices about JSON. Number 1, JSON properties can be in any order, unlike CSV. JSON does not support comments, as we saw, unlike XML, which supports comments. Keys must be unique per object in JSON. You cannot use duplicated keys, which makes sense. The naming convention, naming styles, camelCase and snakeCase are the most common naming convention styles for JSON. There's a couple other ones, but these are the most common. And JSON keys are case sensitive. Again, that's important to remember if you're using camelCase. JSON keys are case sensitive, and JSON values are case sensitive as well. Use full names for keys and keep similar properties together inside of the JSON object. It just makes it easier to read for humans, and because usually you start updating, somebody will be reading your documentation, people that consume your data, It's just a best practice, full names and similar properties together. And the last one is keep JSON structure flat, or as much flat as you can. Sometimes you, of course, you want to use hierarchy because JSON allows you to do that, but don't overuse it. Just for better readability and performance, keep JSON structure flat. Well, that's all we have for today. 7 rules for JSON. And thank you so much. And we'll see you in the next video.